Have you ever wondered what on earth these creepy looking trees in Breath of the Wild are? When you go to seek out the Master Sword from deep within the Lost Woods, you may notice that unlike past iterations of these mystical woods, this time round there's an added eeriness and creepiness to them. Compared to Ocarina of Time for example, where they had a kind of cheery, upbeat musical vibe and was more of a light-hearted maze. In Breath of the Wild, they've become one of the creepiest haunting woods I've ever seen. But what happened? And more to the point of this video, what is up with the trees which seemingly appear to be screaming, almost agonizingly in pain or terror? What horrifying fate did these woods meet and its living beings go through to end up like this? Be sure to go and grab yourself a snack or drink and send them in to get featured right here, and let's now delve into this horrifying mystery within the Lost Woods. To begin, let's quickly take a look at the state of the woods in Breath of the Wild. Unlike their more magical appearance in Ocarina of Time, they are now a creepy woods cloaked in heavy fog, which if ventured in the wrong direction for too long, the fog will become unbearably thick and consume Link, returning him to the entrance. So to some degree they are still similar in the sense that getting lost returns you to the entrance, but they are no longer the beautiful forest we once knew. This place is a haunting wasteland. When exploring and working your way to the centre where the Great Deku Tree lives, we can see these almost hollowed out trees that resemble a screaming face and stretch their arms, and for the longest time, I saw this as nothing more than a little spook from the developers. But then I remembered, the Deku tends to be a type of living creature connected to both the Lost Woods and Kokiri/Korok Forest area. What if these trees are not there to scare us slightly, but are actually the remains of dead Deku trees? Well, to answer that question, we must first take a look at the quote-unquote Deku family. Throughout the series, we see various living creatures of all sorts with the title of Deku. You've got the Deku Scrubs, Deku Babas, or as I like to call them, glorified Venus flytraps, and of course you have the Great Deku Tree, and Deku Tree spouts upon the death of the Great Deku Tree of that time. Did I mention we're talking about Dekus here? They are all connected in a way, more so the scrubs and trees, but I'd consider the Babas to be part of this family in some sort of way, maybe a distant relative or cousin I suppose. The point I'm trying to make is that anything Deku tends to be a living creature and that they all eventually die. But what I want to look at is how they die and what happens when they do. In both Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask, which is the best game ever, wait, what the... we can actually see this happen. During the events of Ocarina of Time, following Link's journey inside the Great Deku Tree, the wise and noble tree passes away, and later in the game, we can come back to find a Deku Tree sprout. It is known that whenever the Great Deku Tree passes on, a new one is born nearby, as the old one becomes one with the forest, passing on its life essence. This is the reason that we see the Great Deku Tree across multiple installments. They are seen in the Wind Waker and obviously Breath of the Wild, but these are definitely not the first of their kind. As generation after generation passes, new Great Deku Trees are born as the former grows old and passes on. But this isn't just limited to the Great Deku Tree. In Majora's Mask, we see during the ending credits a grieving Deku butler as his son's lifeless, empty remains stand there in the forest. This is what happens when a Deku dies. They become part of the forest. And although Deku Babas don't necessarily solidify and become part of the forest, we can assume this is because of their hostility. Perhaps whilst they are part of the Deku family, they aren't exactly a welcome one, a weed within the garden if you like. But Deku Scrubs and trees are proper members, I guess. This is why when they die, they become part of the forest, internalizing themselves and ultimately growing the forest. Now I should clarify that there isn't actually an official Deku family, but it's pretty safe to assume that all of these creatures are connected in terms of being forest creatures. Some are of high intelligence and others not. Well, at least the glorified Venus flytrap tried his best. But how does all of this connect to the creepy tree scene in Breath of the Wild? Well, what I'm about to tell you may come as a shock, but could be a horrifying truth. What we could be seeing in Breath of the Wild is a case of long, dead Deku trees. As mentioned earlier, when the Great Deku Tree dies, another sprouts in its place. The Great Deku Tree is a living being of only one existing at a time. They are the guardian of the forest and creator of the Kokiri/Koroks. This tree plays a vital role in life here, but does age naturally over time, and I'm proposing that all of these trees may be former Great Deku trees, but You may be asking, how could there be so damn many? Well, there is one huge detail that we haven't considered yet, the time frame of Breath of the Wild. If you didn't already know, Breath of the Wild takes place hundreds of thousands of years after the entire Zelda timeline, and to this day we still don't know exactly where it falls in terms of which branch it comes under, if any, but we are not about to go there today. Point being, it takes place hundreds of thousands of years after the events of these games. During that time frame, many great Deku trees would have come and gone throughout the generations, and what we see in Breath of the Wild, in my opinion, may be the remains of those great Deku trees from over the years. And you may also be asking me, well, what about their size? These trees clearly aren't the same size as the Great Deku Tree. Well, that could just be because over the many, and I mean many years past, they began to shrink and shrivel up as most vegetation does once dead, forming them into these freaking looking trees screaming in pain. That, or these could just be Deku trees that never saw the same lifespan as others. Not the Great Deku Tree, just Deku trees, because for there to be the Great Deku Tree, there has to be regular Deku trees, right? We don't know if all Deku trees or Great Deku trees live the same lifespan, as ultimately we only see 3 in the entire series. There is nothing to say that this couldn't be the case. I personally just can't accept these lifeless, terrifying trees to be just a design choice. There has to be a deeper meaning. But hey, of course a Zelda theorist would say that. To conclude this theory and wrap everything together, I'm going to propose a few different outcomes. I believe that these creepy looking trees truly could be the remains of former Great Deku trees from the hundreds of thousands of years between the events of the Zelda timeline and the events of Breath of the Wild. Or they could just be normal Deku trees, but no matter what, they're dead, screaming trees. Or they could even be failed Deku sprouts, which would explain the screaming face of pain. Either way, like mentioned earlier, they passed on and became part of the forest, expanding their home, in this case specifically the protective surroundings of their home. Each loss is also a gain for them, part of the Deku, part of the forest. Thanks a ton for watching. Be sure to drop a like if you enjoyed and consider subscribing for more Zelda content, as we are currently on the road to 100,000 subscribers. It would be highly appreciated. What do you think of this theory? Are these creepy looking trees actually the standstill remains of former Deku trees? Or is it something completely different? Leave a comment below and look out for my replies. As always, a huge heartfelt thank you goes out to all of my supporters across Patreon and YouTube. I cannot express to you enough how helpful and appreciated the support is. If you'd like to join them here at the end of all of my videos, get yourself a shout out upon joining and more, then consider supporting via Patreon or YouTube. Again, thanks for watching, and until the next time, I've been Hyrule Gamer.